we're back for another vintage playthrough of an obscure Games Workshop game, and this time it's Bombers over the Sulphur River, written by Andy Chambers and released by Games Workshop for a limited time in 1998. Bombers over the Sulphur River is a two-player game set during the Rindsworld campaign. One player plays the Orcs, piloting 4 bombers down the valley and attempting to destroy 2 Imperial bridges, while the other player plays as the Imperial defenders using a selection of flak guns, interceptors, and other tricks to try and slow down the Orcs. The game was released during the run of Epic 40,000, the 3rd edition of the Epic game system from 1997, and it comes with 6 Epic scale planes, 4 Orc fighter bombers and 2 Imperial Thunderbolt interceptors. These are in the old Epic 6mm scale, so they're a fair amount smaller than, say, a modern Aeronautica Imperialis plane. The rest of the Imperial defences are represented by tokens, but this is Gary's set, and like many owners, he's filled it out with suitable models to represent everything. There are epic scale hydras and artillery turrets to represent the flak guns, custom rock spires, and some defence lasers built from, well, various spare bits. It's a really beautiful set, and it all fits neatly into the original box with the aid of some custom foam. So gameplay for this is pretty simple. All of the rules fit on 4 sides of A4 paper. Each turn, the Orc player gets to move their bombers, rolling 2 dice for each and picking 1 as the speed. That speed affects loads of things later in the turn, so you don't always want to pick the highest one. The bombers move down these circles, following the branching paths, but they can never move into a square they just left, which means that if they get turned around, they may have to take a detour to point the right way again. The way you remember where they've come from is by pointing the tail towards the circle they just left. If they encounter an Imperial token, the token's flipped over and gets a chance to attack, and if the bomber's still alive after the token's been resolved, the bomber gets a chance to make an attack run on whatever's left in the space. The bomber can also make attack runs on things like bridges. If the bomber encounters a flak unit, it fires at them and it has to try and get over the bomber's speed to hit, which means faster is better for the bomber. But if you encounter a rock spire, well then the bomber has to roll over their speed to dodge, so slower is better. If a bomber encounters an interceptor, both players roll a dice and the winner drives the loser off and chooses which space they go to and thus which way they're facing, possibly sending them on a long detour. If the winner beats the loser in a dogfight by 3 or more, the loser takes a point of damage. Each plane can take 2 damage, and a damaged plane has -1 to all their rolls. In the Imperial turn, the Imperial player can voluntarily reveal 1 token, and then can move and fight with their interceptors or move any flak units, but they only move 1 square. The objective for the Orcs is to damage or destroy the 2 Imperial bridges, each of which can take 4 damage. They don't have to destroy both. There's a range of win or lose states based on how many waves of bombers are sent out, but most of the time they want to try and destroy at least 1 in order to get a win. The objective for the Imperials is to stop them. So pretty simple, but there's enough pieces on the board at once that it can get quite interesting. Let's play. So, setup starts with the Imperial player, that's Gary in this, selecting 6 random tokens, looking at them so he knows what he's got, and then placing them face down wherever he wants on the board. And the 4 Orc bombers line up at the start of the board. The game begins, and the Orcs always get first turn. As mentioned, each bomber rolls 2 dice for their speed and picks the one they want, but that's their speed for the turn. They can move over each other, but can't end their turn on another plane or another interceptor. It's my first turn, and there's nothing within 6 squares anyway, so they all just zoom forward since there's no tokens nearby. It's then the first Imperial turn, and Gary reveals an interceptor, which immediately moves into a dogfight with this plane here. Both players roll a dice, and the Orc plane wins, so I push the Thunderbolt back into whatever empty square I want. There's nothing else on the board, so that's the end of the Imperial turn. Orcs go next, and the front and back bombers move up without encountering anything. But the left-hand bomber makes a run for it over a token, revealing a rock spire. They have to make a dodge roll by rolling equal to or higher than their speed, and they moved at speed 5, so they fail and take 1 point of damage. After clipping the rock spire, that plane then finishes its move. The last plane then goes for the interceptor, but the interceptor drives it off, and since Gary rolled 3 higher, the Orc plane suffers a point of damage. Imperial turn again, and Gary reveals a 2d6 flak battery. Oh yeah, flak batteries can either be 1d6, 2d6 or 3d6. Gary's interceptor then rolls a 6 for speed and loops all the way around to attack a bomber, but ends up taking a point of damage and is driven off again. Back to the Orcs, and the first plane rolls a 6 and a 2 for its movement, and I opt for the 2 so that he can dodge the rocks a bit better. He makes it through unscathed. The next plane moves around the rocks 6 spaces. The forward plane then goes for a bridge, but first it has to get past the flak. Gary rolls 2d6 for the flak battery and has to equal or beat my speed. He scores 2 hits, which drives me off and does a point of damage. The last damaged plane moves 5 and tries the same run, this time dodging all the flak. If a plane survives the flak, it can make its attack run, rolling 2d6 and trying to roll over its own speed, so in this case slower is better. Flak only has 1 point of damage, so the bomber defeats it and moves onto the bridge. Bridges have 1d6 of flak defense, but that misses too, so the plane does another bombing run against the bridge, causing 1 hit. That's the first bridge damaged. Over to the Imperials, and Gary reveals his 3d6 flak counter and moves the Interceptor at speed 4, chasing after the departing Orc planes. Back to the Orcs again. The rearmost plane, having avoided the rocks, moves up. The recently driven off plane then loops back towards the rocks, and the lead bomber, fresh from damaging the first bridge, starts to move onwards to the second. Over to the Imperials, and Gary reveals a laser up by the next bridge. Lasers are the opposite of flak. They have to roll under speed to hit a bomber, which means they're much better against fast-moving targets, and if they hit a bomber, they insta-kill it. However, after firing, a laser token is turned back down and has to be flipped back over on the Imperial turn before it can fire again. It has to recharge. Gary moves his 3d6 flak up 1 space to protect the bridge, and the Interceptor moves up to take on a bomber, but is destroyed. In the Orc turn, the leading bomber makes a run for the second bridge, moving 4. The flak misses and 1 hit is caused on the bridge, and the bomber loops round. The next plane moves up 1, and the rearmost bomber dodges the rocks so he can loop round next turn. The final bomber moves up 6, avoiding the first bridge and all that flak nearby. Next Imperial turn's very quick, as Gary keeps his flak gun defending the first bridge and turns over a rock spire. Of course, his Interceptor at this point has been destroyed, so back to the Orcs. The undamaged bomber rolls a 6 and goes for the bridge, but it's hit by the flak and Gary drives him off into the space with a laser. Moving at speed 6 makes it really hard to dodge lasers, and I roll a 2, so the bomber is completely destroyed. The next plane moves up, and the third chooses the low speed roll to avoid the rocks, both lining up on the farthest bridge, and at the bottom the final bomber completes its loop. Gary reactivates his laser at the start of the turn and rolls his flak up towards the next bridge. It's a slow turn for the Orcs next, as all the damaged planes roll a 1 for movement, and the Imperials then move their flak just back to where it was. In the next Orc turn, the first plane takes a run at the bridge, but it's driven off by flak. Thankfully, it's going slow enough to avoid the laser. The next moves up 3 to the bridge, avoids the flak, and causes 2 more damage on that bridge, so that bridge is down to 1 point. And the final Orc plane just moves up a bit. In the Imperial turn, Gary recharges his laser and moves his flak to block the pass. The Orc plane highest up the board then rolls double 5, so there's nothing for it but to loop round, try and avoid the laser on the return, and go for the bridge. But his dodge roll is a fail and the bomber is destroyed. The nearby plane then loops round for another run, ending on the recharging laser square, so safe until next turn. The straggler gets through the flak, but is driven off back round his endless loop at this point. The Imperials then recharge their laser and then pull their flak back to the bridge, and the Orc plane furthest up goes for it again. However, the flak drives him off back into the laser square, which means it shoots, but this time the plane successfully dodges. The laser then recharges in the Imperial turn, and the flak goes on the hunt for the lowest down plane. In the Orc turn, the top plane has to loop round again, which means re-entering the laser square. I'm beginning to think this was really clever placement of a laser. The plane fails to dodge and is shot down, and over the next few turns the final bomber slowly makes its way around the loop to attack the lowest bridge. Gary has 4d6 to try and beat the bomber's speed at 5 and succeeds just once, which at least drives the plane off again. The Orc pilot in that bomber just gives up on that bridge and spends the next 2 turns burning hard for the other one. But once they finally get there, the same combo kicks in. The flak drives the final bomber into the laser square, where the Orc fails to dodge and the final bomber is destroyed. So that's the first wave driven off. At this point, the Orc player can choose to bring all 4 bombers back on and complete a whole second wave against the remaining defenders. But we don't need to show you that here to get the gist of the game, so we stop after 1 wave. Both bridges are damaged, but none are destroyed, so that counts as a minor Imperial victory. And there we go. It's a fun little game, and particularly fun to play with all these extra models. I'm not going to lie, there are some missing rules which we had to creatively interpret. It's definitely been written pretty quickly, but it doesn't take much to read between the lines and figure out what Andy Chambers was going for. I think a fair amount of the fun of this, especially for the Imperial player, is derived from the 40k setting, to be honest. I'm not sure a non-40k person would find it much fun being the Imperial. But then, unlike some modern Games Workshop board games, it was only ever marketed to existing fans, so maybe that's fine. Given how compact this is, I'd say it's a really good choice for bringing to tournaments to like play in the bar afterwards or something. Anyway, I have fun playing it, but how can you not have fun when you're playing 4 Orc fighter bombers? Right, I'm off to trick Mira into playing 4 games of Lost Patrol. See you next time.